Aloha, I'm Antonio with HawaiiHypnosis.org. In this hypnosis podcast, I'm interviewing Steve Andreas from NLP Comprehensive. How you doing today?
I'm good.
The one thing that's always impressed me about Steve and his wife's approach is they don't really rely on hypnotic band-aids, where some people think you just have to use techniques and then leave it at that. They want to just learn the best technique, etc. What are your views on using what I call hypnotic band-aids?
Well, I don't really know what a hypnotic band-aid is, but I use lots of techniques, but the techniques are carefully tailored to what the person's problem is. So I don't consider most of them band-aids. Now, there's a distinction between working with people and getting some stuff out of the way. If people have judgments about their problem, for instance, if you deal with the judgments and you do some kind of normalization like, well, I'm sure if I were in your situation, I'd probably feel the same as you did, or something like that, that can sweep away the judgments, and then the person can refocus on the problem problem itself, and then we can go to work on that. So there's some techniques that don't cure problems, but they make it possible to cure problems.
Okay, so they kind of just sweep away some of the surface level stuff so you can actually go a little bit deeper then.
Oh yeah, people can go crazy with judgments. They have let's say a problem like they get they're social phobia, so they don't feel very socially apt, and then they judge themselves for that, and then they judge themselves for being judgmental, and then they can judge themselves for judging themselves for being judgmental, and there are these actually logical levels of steps, and the farther away they get from the problem, the less energy and attention they have for the problem itself, and if you can clear away that stuff, then you can get down to the problem.
It almost seems like some of them should have actually become judges if they're so good at judging themselves to go and
there's a lot of good judges around. No kidding.
Oh, I've done a good amount of my own judging myself.
People think they're weird for having a problem, or they're abnormal, and some psychologists help that out. They talk in pathology language, like you've got a XYZ diagnosis out of the DSM-4. And so a lot of therapists actually aid in that. Well, it's not really good help, but they contribute to that judging and self-judging and making it harder to solve a problem.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when I'd gone to a couple doctors. I think it was for ADD, and they give me all these super fancy words.
Yeah.
I didn't know what any of them meant.
I'll bet none of them helped your ADD either.
No, none of those words actually helped. Yeah. I think actually learning self-hypnosis meditation, that's what actually helped with that, and probably laying off on some of the sugar.
Well, ADD is an interesting thing. I've worked with a number of people who supposedly had ADD. I worked with one just about a month ago, just before finals. And he was all wigged out about finals and talking suicide and all kinds of stuff. And I asked him about his ADD, and I said, what is it like when you have ADD? And he gestured like this. He says, it's like things coming at me like this. And he gestured about this fast. So they're coming past him, like cars on a freeway, on both sides of him. And I suggested that he just slow it down a little bit. And as soon as he slowed it down, he was able to do that very easily. He just slowed it down, and then things went from, left to right to left. They went like that. The same things, but they went right to left, and they went much slower. And so it was much less bothering to him. And then I said, okay, now pick one of those to pay attention to now. I pointed out you can only work on one of them at a time anyway. These were different college class subjects, econ and political science and so on. And so that made sense to him, so he picked one and let the others just recede into the background so that he could focus on one at a time. And then at a certain point when another one would become more important, then that can come forward and this one can come back. And literally gesturing like this to indicate exactly what I mean. And he didn't have any problem with finals. I did a couple of other things too, but that was one of the things for ADHD. And he'd been on medications ever since he was 9 years old. And I'm convinced that he didn't have any ADD. He responded to my instructions perfectly well. He was very sharp and quick. I didn't think he had ADD. I think all that medication was a complete waste of time. Now, there may be some people who really do have an ADD problem, but I have a hunch that at least half, and maybe a lot more than half, of the people diagnosed with ADD really don't have ADD. They've just learned a bad way to deal with multiple things happening at once. They don't know how to sequence them and how to allow some of them to go into the background so that they're not yammering at them, so they can allow one thing to come forward. Oh yeah, let's pay attention to this, and then flexibility to change that when it's appropriate.
That's interesting. I think I'm going to have to use that process when I work on my websites later. So I have a tendency, I have 3 different websites, I also have a full-time job, and if I'm working on one thing on my website, something else pops in my head. I'm like, okay, I got to do this thing, so I need to
make a note. Write it down.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, some of these things are not rocket science. It's just really simple. If you got 45 things in your head, you can't think about them all at once. It drives you crazy. If you write them down, that means you don't forget them. If you think in terms of parts, that part of the person is aware that you've written it down, so you'll get back to it later. And so they're willing to kind of take a back seat, and then you can do one thing at a time. You can only do one thing at a time anyway.
True. With you saying writing it down as a note, it's kind of interesting. I think a lot of people in hypnosis or NLP, they want a technique to fix everything. I'm sure you've probably come across this before.
Well, everybody wants a magic bullet for everything, but it doesn't exist. You know, there are some techniques that are useful for a wide variety of things, but other techniques, if you're doing good work, they're carefully tailored to specific problems. Like my favorite example of that is the phobia cure and our grief pattern that Connie Ray and I developed, 25 years ago, I think. If someone has if somebody dies in a car crash, it can be combined, the loss experience is combined with the phobic experience of the car crash. And anything you do to one will tend to make the other worse, because a phobia is when you re-enter a horrible experience, and a grief experience is just the reverse. You're separated from a positive experience, and that gives a sense of emptiness.
Okay.
So in order to deal with grief, you have to have them reassociate into a good experience with a lost person so that they can feel their presence with them. And the phobia, you want to do the reverse. You want to back off like this. So unless you separate those two and you say, look, you lost this person and they were a wonderful resource for you in your life, and then they were in this car crash and they died. Those are two separate experiences. And literally use my hand gestures to separate them out like that. So over here is the phobic experience, we'll do something with that. Here's the grief experience, we'll do something with that. And they'll be different things. And the intervention is very carefully tailored to exactly the structure of those different things.
Interesting.
I know years ago there was one guy in NLP who shall remain nameless who thought that the cure for everything was self-confidence. And so whatever a person had, he would try and teach him self-confidence. Now, self-confidence is useful if and only if you have competence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you can't spell, or you can't write, or you can't do some specific skill like that, all the self-confidence in the world isn't going to do you any good. In fact, it's an invitation to continual disappointment, because you think you can do this thing and you keep finding out you can't.
Yeah, it's like
so that makes things worse.
It's like, I believe it was Einstein, his quote could be wrong, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result.
Yeah.
This way you're just being confident about and doing something insane and being confident at it.
Well, think about it. If somebody's incompetent and you give them self-confidence, you're making them worse. Because then they may go out and talk to other people and charge a lot of money to do things they can't actually do. I've seen a few of those in my lifetime.
I think
they hurt
had a few
themselves and they hurt other people, and they're not any better off. If you're incompetent, it's much better to know about it, because then you can at least be congruent and say, hey, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah, it's I always see it as a continual learning experience.
Well, hopefully, but some people don't learn very well.
No. Some people, I've met a couple people, they think they know everything, and then they go to take on the world, and they can quickly fall flat on their face.
One of my favorite quotes is, the second kick of the mule has no educational value.
I'm going to have to remember that one.
That's a good one. If somebody's not learning from their experience, deliver that one. It's a really right brain communication. See, if you could say left brain, oh, you're not learning from your experience, that won't have much impact. It won't have much punch.
Yeah.
But if you give them the second kick of the mule has no educational value, their right brain will really process that and probably remember it. You'll probably remember that.
Oh, yeah, the pain. I'm pretty sure getting kicked by a mule or burned. I'm pretty sure I'm going to remember. I remember when I was a kid, burned myself once on the stove. I might have done it one other time, but I'm pretty sure once I think it was like 4, I touched a stove, hand blister, and I realized don't do it anymore, it hurts.
Another favorite quote of mine is Mark Twain. He says, "The man who sets out to carry a cat by the tail learns a lesson that will never grow dim and doubtful."
You know what? I can definitely see that. I can see the visual of a cat clawing.
Well, that's and to get back to the topic of hypnosis, as far as I'm concerned, that's what really hypnosis is all about, is creating experience. It's not just jawboning somebody. Hypnosis, or any good communication, is creating an experience for someone. And by creating experience, I mean creating an experience in all major representational systems. So if they have an image, they have sounds that go with it, and they have feelings that go with it. So if you think about the image of carrying a cat by the tail, you can probably hear the yowl of the cat. You can feel the scratches on your hand. And you can see the cat, going like this, like going crazy.
Yeah.
Now, that kind of experience in all different systems lasts a lot longer than some dull, conscious mind communication like, you got to learn from your experience, or, so something bad happened to you, what did you learn from it? That's very conscious mind communication. But if you can use your words to elicit images, that's where the real learning takes place, particularly in terms of the kind of things that people come to therapy to get resolved. If they could solve their problem with their conscious mind, they'd have done it already, and they wouldn't come into therapy.
You'd probably be broke if they could do that.
Yeah, well, a lot of people would be broke. A lot of incompetent people would be broke, too.
Oh, well, I don't know about Big Pharma. They still be going on.
Well, pharma, I'm talking therapists.
Yeah, therapists would be broke. Pharma, I don't think ever going to be broke.
Well, let's hope. So another way of thinking about it, I don't really do hypnosis. And Richard and John used to talk about, they had this little thing going on where one of them would say, there's no such thing as hypnosis. And the other one say, I disagree, everything is hypnosis. And what they meant by that was all communication is hypnosis. All communication induces states in people and gives them some kind of experience. Whether it's useful or not, another question. And that it's really on a spectrum, that some communication is very conscious mind and very literal and very descriptive and usually boring and dull. And then on the other end is very metaphoric communication, where it's very much eliciting experience and isn't as logical as conscious mind communication. And so that's what you really need when you're talking to somebody, is to communicate with their right brain and their subcortical area too. I mean, think of somebody who has really intense fears. The official diagnosis is this is happening in the amygdala, which is in the base of the brain, right at the top of the spine. Well, I have some doubts about how well they understand that, but certainly it's in the very primitive part of the brain that we share with other dogs, cats, other mammals. That's where you got to work.
Is that the part of the brain? Is that what controls the fight-flight response?
Yeah, fight, flight, or freeze.
Speaking of the amygdala, I think I pronounced it right. Have you ever heard of Neil Slade's work?
Not by name.
Neil Slade, he talked about tickling the amygdala, where I think you imagine almost like a feather hitting the amygdala, and apparently at some point, I don't know if it'll activate it, where it'll bring on states of pleasure, relaxation, euphoria, etc.
I don't think that's the amygdala. That's some other part, but I don't know.
Might be something, or might be something else.
I'm happy to admit my ignorance when that's the case.
Yeah,
plenty of things I don't know.
I think we all have ignorance everywhere. And we were talking about how you don't know everything. That's where the whole curiosity thing comes about that you would talk about earlier.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see NLP progressing in the future? Where do you see NLP going?
I'm not a what do you call it? A
Fortune teller?
fortune teller. I'm not a fortune teller. In fact, a lot of times when a client says, I know I'm going to be grieving like this till the end of my days, and I look around and say, let me see your fortune telling license.
That's a good one.
Now again, that's trying to create an experience. It's not just, I could say very verbally, I say, well, I don't think you can tell the future. That's boring. It doesn't impact. But if you do this whole act thing and you go, where's your fortune telling license? I don't see it on the wall here.
That's a good one.
Then it creates experience, and that's what people really remember.
So everybody listening out there, if you have a time machine, let us know that, and let us know how NLP turns out in the future.
Yeah. Well, I hope, and one of the things that's happening is that people are doing research all around the globe. I don't think a week goes by, or maybe 2 weeks, when I don't read a piece of research that validates some aspect of NLP. So the word's getting out there, but it's not getting out there as a whole package of stuff. But very gradually, people are learning elements of NLP that that NLP discovered a long time ago. So I think probably the knowledge will endure and be refined. Some of it will be found to be wrong. But the basic knowledge base will, I think, endure unless we wipe ourselves off the planet or something, of course, which is increasingly likely.
Hopefully we don't do anything like that.
Well, let's hope not. I probably won't be around.
You never know. We might find that time machine and prevent some of that stuff in the future.
I don't think time machines are part of the future.
Yeah, probably
If they
not.
were, people would be coming back and visit us. And I have not heard of anybody coming back to visit us from the future.
That's a good way to poke a hole in the time theory, or the time machine theory.
It reminds me of my favorite recent joke. What's the difference? Why is virginity like a soap bubble?
Well, what's that?
One prick and it's gone.
You heard it from Steve. That's a good one.
And again, it gives you a picture, you know. And whether you can ever use that particular picture anywhere, it's a hypnotic communication, which I guess is what this talk is all about.
Yeah, that was a good one. Definitely evoked a response from me.
Let me mention one other thing. Milton Erickson was probably the most thorough investigator of hypnosis that I have any awareness of. I've been reading some of his collected papers are about 8 feet long books. He did incredible research. Once he researched literality. Literality is when someone answers the literal meaning of a question rather than the intended meaning. So if I said to you, can you shut the door? And you said yes, that would be a literal answer. And so he explored the literality tends to occur in hypnosis, particularly deep hypnosis. People tend to be very literal, and they will answer a question like that literally rather than actually do the intended meaning of it. Yeah, the intended activity. He ran 3,000 subjects through this one simple little experiment where he'd do waking state, light trance, medium trance, deep trance, somnambulistic trance. And he would ask them the same question. And he'd jot it down on a piece of paper, and he had incredible data. But 3,000 people. Who's got the patience for that? He's incredibly patient and thorough. And he always used to make it very clear that there's depth of trance, there's hypnosis or depth of trance, where someone has a very, very narrow focus of attention. They can't hear the waves anymore. They don't see the person, their surroundings. They're involved in some other world and some other place and time. And then what you do in hypnosis. And most people that I've seen do hypnosis, they're on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is somebody who says, go into deep trance and big long thing and arm levitation in the air and so on, and get all these trance phenomena like positive hallucinations, negative hallucinations, and so on. And then it's what you do in trance. At the other end, and I'm at the other end. At the other end, you have methods that work whether or not you induce trance. They're very specifically tailored to a particular problem. And I don't use trance any more than sometimes I'll say, close your eyes and pay attention to what's going on inside. Or close your eyes and imagine that image going away in space, or doing this, or becoming closer, or getting paired with another image, or something like that. So that's about all the hypnosis I ever do. Now, Erickson used to spend hours and hours and hours training people in trance. And then he'd give them very, very complex things to do, and they were very artistic. But even when I saw him in 1979, he was bragging that he could cure a phobia in 6 sessions. Well, I'd already learned from Bandler and Grinder how to do it in 1 session. In fact, I've got a YouTube that people can go on, and if you Google up Steve Andreas phobia, you can see it. I removed this gal's phobia in less than 7 minutes. And if you Google 25-year follow-up, you can see a 25-year follow-up interview with the same gal, and she's still fine 25 years later.
I think I've seen that video, and for everybody listening, what I'll do if you're watching this, I'll put a link right here. You can go directly to his video. Just click, it'll go right to it.
Oh, great. Good. So people vary across the spectrum. Some people essentially all trance and then instruct the unconscious mind to solve the problem, and amazingly that often works. That if someone's in deep trance and you instruct their unconscious mind, especially, you do it very hypnotically, your unconscious mind has the right and the duty to resolve this problem for the betterment of the whole person, blah, blah, blah. Often, and, let me know with a finger signal when you're done, and then you just wait. And you might wait 5 minutes, you might wait a half an hour. Eventually you get a finger signal, and often they actually have reorganized somehow spontaneously. At the other end, I take people through a very specific recipe. Now, people often don't like recipes. Usually that's because they think of a recipe as one recipe will solve everything. And that's, of course, never the case. If you think about recipes in a cookbook, there's a recipe for making cake, there's a recipe for making a roast, there's a recipe for making a good tossed salad. They're not the same recipe. Yeah. So you have specific recipes to accomplish certain goals. But I take them really through a step-by-step recipe. And people don't realize how much of their life is actually supported by recipes. This camera here has probably 1 million recipes for creating the silicon chip that takes in the mathematics that goes into the signal transformation and transduction and formatting and all the rest. There's recipes up to kazoo. And all our life is done with recipes. The paint on the walls here, the people who made the glass in the windows, the doorknobs, those are all made with recipes. Somebody doesn't just go sit down, oh, let me be creative. Let's figure out a new way to make a doorknob. They're using the recipes for the brass plating, for the tumbler inside, for the keys, for cutting the keys, for the screws that go in hold it into the door, and all the rest of it. So I love recipes. And recipes are a way that you can have someone have at least some of the skills of Milton Erickson without having to be in a wheelchair, without having to spend 70 years of his life researching. He's enormously boring to me.
He did a lot of research.
He did a lot of research. I could tell a couple of Milton stories.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of my audience would love to hear them.
I was only down there for a week, and I really, at that stage of my evolution, I couldn't tell what he was doing. I probably wouldn't be able to tell much about what he was doing now because he was so subtle. But at one point, this is like 8 or 10 people in a room about this big. It was a converted garage. It was his office. And he says, can you tell when someone's hypnotized? Now, most people took it as an intellectual question. Like, what are the signs of hypnosis, blah, blah. So various people would say, oh, there's Spiegel's sign, the eyeballs rolling up, and the cheeks at first become asymmetrical, and then they become symmetrical, and then they become looser and more flaccid, and so on like this. And he got several answers like this. Me, I don't know from nothing, but I know this is a trap. Somehow I could sense that this was a trap. And besides which, I didn't know much about hypnosis then. And so a little later, he turned to a woman who was sitting about 2-3 people to his right. He says, Mary, where are we? And she goes, up in the apple tree. And what's my name? Tommy. He had zoned her through the floor. And when he asked, can you tell when someone's hypnotized, he wasn't asking a theoretical question. He was saying, can you tell that this lady is hypnotized? Only he didn't point at her.
Is there a video of that?
No.
Okay, I thought.
No, there's very few videos of Erickson. Then there was another day, it was really a kick. No, again, he created a response in people because people gave this intellectual thing. And he made them look like asses, right? Because they're asking this intellectual question, and they can't tell that this gal is zoned through the floor. I mean, just really in a deep trance. Now, that's an experience that everybody in that room, I will guarantee you, will carry for the rest of their days.
Oh, yeah. That's
hypnosis. Not just that he hypnotized this lady, but he did it in order to prove to people they didn't know as much as they thought they did. And of course, he got a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists who really couldn't do anything. You know, they could talk their ass off, but they couldn't really do anything.
They couldn't get the results that he was able to get.
Right. Well, they couldn't even notice when he was getting results. So it was another day. Different people would come into the group during the week. Some people only stayed for a day or two. My wife and I stayed for the full 5 days. But some people would come in on different days. And one morning, this woman comes in and she's dressed in purple from her head to her toe. And I mean literally.
Covered in purple.
Covered in purple. Purple bow in her hair, purple scarf, purple shirt, purple dress, purple shoes, purple stockings. Everything purple. Obviously, she knew that that was the one color that Erickson could see well as a result of his 2 bouts with polio. He was almost colorblind. So at one point he goes, now, as you know, so she's sitting, let's say, over here. Let's say a couple of people over here. She sits down over there, the gal in the purple. He says, as you know, due to my polio, I've been colorblind, and sometimes I can sort of see what color is there. And then he turned to this person over here and he says, now I think you've got a very light pink shirt with little tiny light green polka dots. And of course he was correct. And then he would do to the next person. He did the same thing all around the room, just nailing it, just telling them exactly what color their clothing was. He got to her and he says, but I have no idea what color your dress is. Would you please tell me? And she looked like somebody just hit her in the head with a sledgehammer because she was so primed to, obviously she was a people pleaser. You know, she wanted to please Erickson by wearing purple.
And she knew that he obviously loved purple.
Yeah, and for him to say that you never saw somebody drop into a trance so fast. And then he used that time to make a few suggestions, which of course you had to accept after that confusion thing.
Oh, yeah. About
pleasing other people rather than pleasing yourself. Stuff like that. So
interesting.
He played a lot. And he wasn't bashful about confronting people with their ignorance.
Yeah, he was very much of a practical joker from what I've heard.
Well, not so much a practical joker, but a teacher in the sense of some of the spiritual traditions where the teacher teaches by example and teaches by creating experience rather than just babbling off sutras or something like that. That's mostly a complete waste of time.
Yeah,
But to create experience, that lasts. And it happens instantaneously. That's another point. When you tell a joke, like a couple of jokes I've told, or I tell you about this thing that happened with Erickson, it's in a moment in time. People make the images, they hear the sounds, they have the feelings. The change happens instantaneously. And I believe that all change happens instantaneously. A lot of people don't agree with me. I think sometimes it takes a lot of little changes in a row to get somebody's outcome, what they're finally going for. But each little change, I think, happens instantaneously. Like a joke. Like any good joke. When you hear the punchline, bam, it's right there.
That's when you start laughing. Like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't take long to get it.
It's almost like, talking about a bunch of little changes, almost like if you go to a comedy club, you got a bunch of little jokes that are funny, will maybe lead up to the final the one final joke that'll set everybody over the top.
Well, that's a little different. That's using a sequence of jokes, and that's fine. But each piece of that sequence happens instantaneously, and that's whether it's a good joke or a bad joke, whether you like it or not. The twist of understanding, the little change in meaning, happens instantaneously. You can think later on, oh, that was really a crummy joke, but still you got it, and the getting it was instantaneous.
Yeah.
Of course, if it's a really good joke, you'll remember it longer.
I have a bunch of cheesy jokes. For example, when I talk to tourists all day long out here in Kauai, some tourists will ask me, like, oh, do you like it here? And I'll tell the guys, even if their wives are around, I'm like, you wouldn't like it here, having to wake up day after day, seeing girls in bikinis walking by, I'm like, you wouldn't like it one bit. And it's a cheesy joke, but I say it because it makes me laugh.
Yeah, well, you might as well enjoy or have a good time yourself, whether other people are.
Oh yeah, I'm always doing something so I can keep myself entertained.
On the beach here, sometimes there's not even bikinis, which is even nicer.
That's great. You guys would love Kauai. Is there anything else that you have that you're working on, any books or anything you want to talk about or mention?
Well, I could mention my website, steveandreas.com, and also you can Google Steve Andreas blog. There are a lot of free articles on there. The blog, I write something up every few weeks or so, and the articles on the website are usually older, but sometimes pretty useful. There's an article on the grief pattern, the forgiveness pattern, which most people aren't really aware of. A lot of people get training in NLP, but they don't get those particular pieces. And almost everybody has resentments and grudges, and almost everybody has losses. Yeah. So they're pretty universal patterns. And one of the ways to establish yourself as somebody who can make a difference in somebody's life is, rather than say, well, what do you want, or what do you want to work on, or what's your outcome, or something like that, you can just start out and say, do you have any losses? Have anybody you're pissed at? And if they say yes, and they kind of have to, if they're honest, then you can pull this pattern out, you can do the pattern through, and they know that you can do that, at least, that piece. Because you can do that usually in a half hour or so, either one of those. And that's a different way of working than just starting from where the other person... a lot of people think they know what they want, but they may not know what they need. So if you ask them to come up with what they want or need, they might not have the foggiest notion. Like once in a workshop, I worked with a woman who'd been in therapy for over a year. This is written up in our book, Heart of the Mind. Over a year exploring her feelings of dissatisfaction.
That doesn't sound like any fun.
Well, it wasn't, and didn't get her anywhere either, because the feeling, she just felt bad. So she had, 1,000 different ways of feeling bad. Well, I found out she had a bad decision strategy. Basically, her decision strategy was very painful and unpleasant, and it would kind of cycle around. It didn't really lead to a decision. It cycled around, and she felt worse and worse each time it cycled. And then finally, to end her agony, she would make a choice randomly. So even at a restaurant, simple little thing at a restaurant, she'd just poke her finger at the menu and order whatever it was. So, of course, usually she was dissatisfied with it. And that's how she made all her decisions in her life.
Doesn't sound good.
Not good. This is how she decided who to marry, what house to buy, whether or not to have kids, what car to buy. I mean, her life was a disaster because she didn't have a good way to make decisions.
It was almost like it was fate.
Well, it kind of was. And she just never learned how to make good decisions. She probably learned from her mother how to make horrible decisions. So I taught her how to make good decisions. I taught her a very simple, good decision strategy. There are several variations, and they all work, and they all have advantages and disadvantages, but I taught her one that worked. From then on, she could make decisions that she was satisfied with. Now, it didn't cure all the decisions she'd already made. Those were still there. She was still married to this guy that she went like that.
And we said, I'm going to marry this guy.
I think I'll take that guy. So she still had the problem of what to do, but now she had a decision strategy where she could take action. Now she could say, well, let me look at this guy. Do I want to stay married to him or not? And what are the pluses and what are the minuses? And go through logical, rational decision process to decide what she wants to do. So she can clean up the mess that she's been making by doing random decisions all her life.
Flipping a coin and be like, here, I'll eat this today.
Yep.
I'll marry this person. Yeah.
Not a good plan.
Everybody listening, don't use that decision strategy. Not a good idea. But one thing you can decide on is you can subscribe to my newsletter. If you're on my website, you can see the email form up there or below or on this video. You can get more interviews like this. Yeah, Steve, I want to say thank you very much. This has been an awesome interview.
Oh, you're welcome. Hope it was fun and interesting.
Great, yeah. I always knew you had a sense of humor. I'm gonna have to remember the.
Humor's a big thing. Let me close with one more thing. The patterns of humor, the structural patterns of humor. I don't mean the content. The structural patterns of humor. There are about 17 of them. They're exactly the same as the 17 patterns of reframing. And when you reframe somebody's problem and you make it into an advantage, or you let them see it differently or have a different perspective on it, there are basically 17 ways to do that. They're identical with the patterns of humor. I've got a whole collection of jokes and cartoons and stuff that illustrate all these different patterns. And some of them pack 2 or 3 patterns into one joke. But they're actually the same. So when you tell a joke, not only is it fun,
yeah,
and for both of you, hopefully, although some people can go, you're making a joke about making fun of my problem. I say, well, do you want to do that, or do you want to moan and groan about it?
Exactly.
Now that's also a reframing pattern. Do you want to do this, or do you want to do that? And you pose somebody it's called a forced choice alternative. But the patterns are the same. And when you tell a joke, you're eliciting the neurology that the person needs in order to shift their perspective on something, because that's what every joke does. So even if the joke is a corny joke, or even if the joke is not relevant to the person's problem, it loosens things up and it lets them start thinking about seeing things in a different way. Like one of my favorites is, what do you want people to say about you at your funeral?
What's that?
Look, he's moving.
That's a good one.
Now again, that's that instantaneous switch of meaning. The context changes. The meaning of the words change. Erickson used to tell really corny jokes. One of them is, what did the drowning boy say as he was pulled out of the river by the balls?
What's that?
Thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Ball. Now talk about a corny joke.
God, I could see Erickson doing that.
But it got people thinking in terms of auditory ambiguity, and jokes are very useful in loosening people's heads up. Now, if you tell a joke that's directly relevant to their problem, then it's even better, because then you're handing them exactly the pattern or a pattern that will be useful in rethinking their problem. So one of my favorite examples of that is a story of a guy who was a young sailor in the Navy, and he was a bit innocent. He'd grown up in a very churchy and restricted life and so on, and his buddies decided, let's take him pole dancing. So they take him out to a bar pole dancing, and gal starts taking off her clothes. And he turns absolutely ashen pale like this, jumps up and runs out of the bar. And his buddies jump up and run out of the bar and after him and says, well, what's wrong? What's going on? And he's still shaking like this and still pale and ashen, and he says, my mother always told me if I looked at a naked woman, I'd turn to stone, and it's starting to happen.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a lovely one. God, I learned that one in college, which is about 55 years ago.
See, I think it's the difference between you and some other, as you can call them, psychotherapists, therapists, and whatnot. There's some people that are just so dry, they just want to deliver it. You gotta get people to laugh.
Yeah, and see, if you tell that joke to somebody who's a hypochondriac and they got all these aches and pains and they're worried about the aches and pains, that's the perfect joke to tell them, because the theme is you're misinterpreting what's actually a natural sensation. And throughout a day, I have little squiggles and squirts of pain and aches and stuff, and always have, not just at my current age.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything about them, because it doesn't mean I'm dying of cancer or something like that. You tell that joke to a hypochondriac, It's a way of communicating directly with their unconscious mind. So it's hypnosis. And you're both laughing at the joke and having a good time.
You don't have to have them squawk like a chicken or do any other stage hypnosis bit.
There's an Argentinian proverb that says, "In heaven they tell jokes, in hell they explain them." That's another good one.
Yeah, I've noticed it with, there's been some people, recently I was telling some people some knock-knock jokes that live here on the island of Kauai, and some people, I thought everybody knew what a knock-knock joke was. I'm like, knock-knock, and they look at me, they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, you want me to explain it? I was like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, you have to be inculcated into the cult.
Yeah, definitely. Steve,
okay, maybe we're done.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
And everybody, check
wishes.
this website out, steveandreas.com. The blog is steveandreas.com/blog, right?
I don't remember. If you Google Steve Andreas blog, it'll come up. And then we got a lot of products on Real People Press.
Yeah, definitely. And
a lot of samples. So
his material's good. It's
like
good material.
not too long. Well, it's a couple of years ago. I did a bunch of client sessions and made videos of a bunch of them. And I've got little samples on there, so you can see little samples of how I work with people, actual real clients. And that is so missing, you know.
The one book that that you came out with recently, it was not too old. I think you made a second volume. Was the
Help with Negative Self-Talk,
yep.
And then it published with Norton in an actual paperback called Transforming Negative Self-Talk, available from Norton. It's a paperback.
Definitely, if you have negative self-talk, that is definitely the book to check out.
I think so. And most people who deal with negative self-talk don't know, well, they don't know up from down. That's a little arrogant, but that's okay.
It's fine.
I won't judge myself for that.
You've been in this field for a while.
I have been around the block a few times.
Thanks.
Okay, take care.
Aloha.